Well, every road I see leads away from me. There's not a single one that leads me home. The road keeps saying, friend, come see what's round the bend. So is it any wonder that I roam? All the places I have been keep calling me back again. Down in the pines I hear the cold winds blow. My heart keeps telling me, footloose and fancy free, and the road goes by and calls me as it goes. Well, maybe somewhere there's a someone waiting with a smile, and maybe there'll be some place I can stop and rest a while. And maybe you weren't meant to be just a rolling stone, and there's a road to travel on that leads you back to home.
All right, we are rolling. Howdy, folks. Welcome back to Tales of the Trails. I'm joined here by Garrett, who's the channel manager and basically does most of the managing. I just own the thing.
I'm just riding shotgun. You're driving the stage.
Yeah. So Garrett's here, help kind of keep track of the chats and the moderating and stuff, and make sure we don't have any of them nasty trolls coming in out there. Anyway, topic of today is we're starting into the Southern Plains Indian Wars, and I'm going to be the first one to admit I didn't do my homework. I haven't been doing my research like I should, but we're going to do the best we can. So the two books I'm going to reference in this one quite a bit, and of course there's a lot more to it than just these. The first one here is the Sand Creek Massacre by Stan Hoig, and this one's not a real big book. It's a pretty quick and easy read. I read this in a day, but it's chock full of information for no bigger than what it is. Great source there. Of course, there's a lot of extra books out there as well. Letters of George Bent, Fighting Cheyennes, all those talk about Sand Creek, but this is a good one that's just on the Sand Creek Massacre. And then the one that I started reading and I've been meaning to read, I've read it partially through a couple times, is the Washita by Jerome Green. And when you see me reference authors, Hoig and Green are going to be two of those that I often recommend people to. But this is the book, Washita, the U.S. Army and the Southern Cheyennes from 1867 to 1869. And so if you want more information, I highly recommend either one of those books. Like I said, there's more books out there. I just don't have them right now in my collection where I got them accessed. Anyways, Garrett, if you want to run through the chat on there and we'll say hello to folks and then we'll get rolling.
Yes, sir. We have Gunsmith 4570s in. Diane Houston, Louisiana Gray, Victor Schultz. Louisiana Gray said he said, I'm also keeping an eye on a barrel in the oven that's niter blowing. It is almost finished. About time to take it out. We have Doug Murray said it's go time. Stephen M. Mann has said the mountain man has entered the room. Franklin Horse. Red Prog said howdy. The Saboteur 45 says howdy.
Hey, Saboteur.
Soylent Green. He said it reminds him of Johnny Cash singing Man in Black. Well, I appreciate that. We're just talking about a few other songs we could add to this. William Schlosser. Coffee is on. George Gooding, sorry. And CBJW is in. He said the Southern Indian campaigns, isn't that where the Big Rock Candy Mountain campaign happens? Garza Vlogs, Squib loads in. Hi, Squib. He says, hey, and pronounce that name, Duke.
Bob Karua.
Hi from New Zealand. We'll just call you New Zealand. And Todd B is in, and that's where we're at right now.
All right. So yeah, like I said, I didn't get a lot of my homework done last night, but I worked at Bent's Fort, which had ties to Sand Creek, so I know a little bit about that. We're going to try to play off on my memory here tonight and see how good I did. But anyways, we'll kind of get started in. So the Southern Indian Wars really goes hand in hand with the Northern Plains Indian Wars for a long while, and Sand Creek is going to kind of be that point where they're going to break apart and really get distinguished, but they are tied together. So of course, the event that really gets noted for starting the Plains Indian Wars is, of course, the Grattan Massacre. And that Grattan Massacre is going to have effects, down in the southern region as well as up in the northern region as well. And it's going to lead into the First Sioux War, which takes place right after 1856 to 58, thereabouts. And with all those campaigns, it kind of sets that precedent of distrust between the natives and the federal government. And so that goes on a few more years. But the thing that's really going to spark off the campaigns that are going to start taking place in Colorado and then make their way further south is going to be when they discover gold in 1859 at Pikes Peak. So the Colorado Gold Rush, Denver Gold Rush. Because all of a sudden, just like when you had the California Gold Rush, everybody was heading for California. Now everybody's heading for Denver. And Denver is right along the edge of the mountains, which is right along the edge of the Southern Cheyenne and the Southern Arapaho territories. And so that's where the strain's going to start coming in. Now, the Cheyenne had been friendly towards the whites coming in for a long time. It was kind of one of those things of, we don't bother them, they won't bother us. They just kind of went about their business. And that kind of, friendly, just non-hostile relations had started clear back when William Bent had started his fur trading post down here about 1833. And so, as I said before, Bent's Fort has a big tie into that. So I'm going to kind of get into that too, leading up to Sand Creek. So the Southern Cheyenne in the late 1820s were starting to make their way down into the Colorado Plains. Prior to that, this area where I'm at, and to kind of give you an idea, I'm about an hour and a half southwest of where the Sand Creek Massacre is at. So, I'm from the area. So the area where I'm at here, this area had been Comanche territory. As Cheyennes start pushing their way south, they start pushing the Comanches out. And about the time that the Cheyennes show up in this area is about the time that William Bent is going to move into this area, and he's really going to draw them down for the Indian trade. And that's what's going to bring them firmly into this territory down here. And, of course, the Southern Arapaho are going to follow with them because the Cheyenne and the Arapaho have a very strong alliance with one another. Pretty similar to the Comanche and Kiowa alliance. So the Cheyenne come down. They make fast friends with William Bent. William Bent had essentially saved a Cheyenne warrior from the Comanches. And so that solidifies the friendship. A few years later, he's going to marry into the tribe, which basically makes them family. And he's going to run his trading post down near the town of La Junta, Colorado, where that's at now. He's going to run his trading post for about 16 years, trading with the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, also trading to an extent with the Comanches and the Kiowas, but not as successful and not to the same extent as his Cheyenne family and Arapaho allies. And then in 1849, when that gold rush comes through, you have a cholera epidemic. And this is really the first time that the Cheyennes are going to get hit hard by the white man's diseases. And so the cholera epidemic, it starts, and this is more of a worldwide epidemic, but starts here in America on the East Coast. And as people are heading west to California, it makes its way into the Plains tribes where it just decimates the populations. And in August, thereabouts of 1849, it was said that members of the Southern Cheyenne who had been with the Northern Cheyennes for the summer buffalo hunts had come down to Bent's Fort to talk with William Bent because he was kind of that bridge, if you will, between the white world and the native world, and they wanted to know what they could do to prevent the disease from getting into them. And as they were waiting, supposedly, now this is, one source, supposedly while they was waiting at Bent's Fort for William Bent to show up, one of the chiefs took sick, died very quickly thereafter. And by the time it was said and done, when the cholera got done with them, half of the Southern Cheyenne had been wiped out by the cholera. So we're talking, possibly up to 3,000 people had been wiped out by that cholera epidemic. So that disease was already going to weaken them down. And because of that, William Bent is going to abandon his trading post there on the Arkansas, along with other factors, including the fact that he was afraid the Army was going to take it away from him. But he continues to operate trade. He trades down Santa Fe. He trades up around the Fort Laramie area. Robert Bent, his son, not to be confused with Robert Bent, his brother, because he named all of his sons after his brothers to alleviate confusion. They're going to, keep operating, keep trading. And about 1853, 1854, he'll build a new trading post 40 miles downriver from the old one and continue to try to operate. But eventually, that trading post is going to be leased to the Army, and the Army is going to establish Fort Wise. Fort Wise is going to have its name changed after the Civil War breaks out to Fort Lyon. And Fort Lyon is going to be that jumping off point for the attack at Sand Creek. And now it's time for a water break.
Okay, I'll get some of these comments. Okay, so here's where we left off. William Schlosser says, 11 Bang Bang is in 11 Bravo? Yes. Not me. I've never been in the military, but my brother Ethan has, and he runs our channel. Big Rock Candy Mountains. Guys, if you have a question, that's what I'm looking for here. Garrett, you should do a cover of the Don McLean song, Bronco Bill's Last Lament. I'll have to look into that. I got my education out behind the barn. I can do some little Jimmy Dickens. Then getting down here. I'll give it a try. Did Gray Pilgrim get a tomahawk to the knee on the way down the trail? Well, I don't know. Hopefully he shows up. He said, Denver born, Colorado resident here, but my family homesteaders Wyoming, Sheridan, Wyoming.
That's pretty country up there.
We got a little Jeremiah Johnson here. You want to read that Dookie in character?
Mexico lies shining like a diamond in the night. Got to ride like the devil. To pay paradise just beyond the river. Comfort's just
a rifle shot away. Okay, so we got a few more here. Soylent Green. Good to see you, Soylent Green. Said, wow, 16 years on the frontier in the early years. Basically another planet. Tough dude.
Yeah, and if you've never been to Bent's Fort, they call it the Mud Castle of the Plains. And really, it's the first permanent establishment in Colorado, even though it only lasts 16 years. But it was like a little town. William Bent had anywhere between 60 and 100 employees.
That's pretty good.
At any given time. Of course, a lot of them wouldn't be there at the same time. The traders that he employed would be sent out to the Indian camps to do trading out there and other little trading posts. But yeah, it was a permanent operation. And really, the history of Bent's Fort, the fur trade history there, very much parallels the history of Fort Laramie. The difference is that Fort Laramie was sold to the Army and officially became Fort Laramie, a military post, whereas Bent's Fort was not. The military did not take over the first one. They did take over the second one.
Louisiana Gray said, love to hear. Actually, I have a recording of my dad doing that, Louisiana. Rod's Vintage Side-by-Side channels in. Hello.
Hello.
Saboteur 45 said I didn't throw the top. Yeah, Stephen M. I'm a pretty big fan of that. But back to the show that we're talking about here tonight. This is the last comment too. Todd B wants to know.
The Battle of Ashall, that was Harney's revenge. Essentially, he went out to chastise him. Come across the first. It just happened to be a village of Brule. I think it was just happened to be the first village Indians he found. He didn't care what Indians they were. And that's one thing that gets noted that creates tension with the Sand Creek Massacre leading up to that is that the Army didn't know one Indian from another. And, they went out with orders to round up some of the natives, or kill some. First ones they found, whether they was right or wrong, and their judgment of who they were, they didn't care.
Diane Houston wants to know. Okay, before we go to that, though, right quick, there's this one here from William Schlosser. He said, Denver lore tells of people participated in the Sand Creek originating in Denver from Laramie Street.
Larimer
Street, sorry.
Larimer. There were people who, because the participants were Colorado volunteers. So that was volunteers raised in Colorado for the purpose of fighting Indians. So where I'd left off at, I just mentioned that the Army had bought Fort Wise and had become Fort Lyon, which was William Bent's former trading post. And so the Army, they're going to take over that. But what's been going on around the area at that time is that the tensions from the people moving into this area are really starting to build up. At first the Cheyennes were fine with the people coming in to mine gold. They're like, come in, take gold that you want, but leave. And of course, as Denver gets established and becomes a permanent city, the Cheyennes realize, okay, these people aren't leaving. And at that time, too, you're starting to see people moving into these river valleys to start farming. And one of those guys was Uncle Dick Wooten. And I believe it was at about that time or just shortly before then, he had been operating a little farm and ranch in this area. And so you're starting to see agriculture coming in. When people start to set up for agriculture, you know that they're really setting up for a long-term stay. Now, there were divisions amongst the Cheyennes at this point. There was those that were strictly opposed and wanted to fight the whites to run them out. And then there was the peace chiefs that realized, we're not going to do any good fighting them. They're going to come. We best find the best way for us to live with them. And a bunch of these peace chiefs included chiefs such as White Antelope, Chief Left Hand of the Arapahoes, and the big one, of course, was Chief Black Kettle. Now, as tensions are starting to mount, Governor Evans, as Colorado becomes officially a territory, Governor Evans wants to see the Indians pretty well gone. It's one of the things when he gets into office is he doesn't care if they're peaceful, if they're friendly or not. They want the Indians gone because as far as they're concerned, the Indians are occupying good land that should be held by Americans at that point. And he's got a young colonel, Lieutenant Colonel Shivington. Well, I shouldn't say young. He was, about the same age as I am, if not a little older, a little younger. But anyway, he's got Shivington, who is a Methodist minister, also has a hatred on for the Indians. And the two operating together is, a setup for a disaster. So as the depredations continue on, one of the bigger ones that gets noted is the Hungate family that gets murdered in 1864 there. And they're going to take the bodies of the Hungate family, put them on display in Denver, and say, this is what these savages, because at that time they considered all Indians to be savages, this is what these savages are doing. And the Cheyenne are going to take the blame for that massacre, or that family being murdered. But later on, it's the Arapahoes that take credit for it. But even though today we still don't 100% know who killed the Hungate family. So as things are building up, of course, we're still in the middle of the Civil War. This is 1864. The Civil War is not over yet. It is still in its having a brain fart here, about its 4th year. And so the government, the federal government, is more worried about trying to win a war back there. They're not really as worried about small little Indian skirmishes going on out here in the West. Now, they have sent out state volunteer units. In 1863 and 64, you start seeing all these volunteer units get sent out to the West. One of those was the 7th Iowa Cavalry, which I've been reading up on that one here as well. And if you look up the book Indian War of 1864 by Eugene Fitch, he was a captain of Company F of the 7th Iowa Volunteer Cav. And they're going to get stationed out at Cottonwood Creek. But Governor Evans really doesn't view it as enough. And so Evans puts in, later in 1864, Evans is going to make a request to the federal government to raise another battalion of basically 100-day volunteers, which is going to be known as the 3rd Colorado Cavalry. And Shivington is going to lead those. But Shivington still isn't quite 100% in charge yet. Wynkoop, whose first name is eluding me right now, like I said, I'm pulling this all from memory. Wynkoop is in charge, stationed at Fort Lyon. He's in charge of the district. And so he had been very much against the Indians, but after I believe it was the Camp Weld Accord, he took the side of the Indians. He was very much friendly with Black Kettle, and he wanted the peaceful Cheyennes to, not be bothered, not be molested, only worry about bringing in the ones that are actually out causing depredations, which most at this point is the dog soldiers, which is kind of a separate little society there. So as that's all going on, Wynkoop is kind of a burr in Shivington's side, and so he's going to get him reassigned back out to Kansas. And once Wynkoop is out of the way, Shivington starts setting up basically his attack on Sand Creek. And Black Kettle and his followers have been told if they were peaceful, if they weren't hostile, to show up Fort Lyon, turn themselves in, and then they would be given rations.
So I just wanted to ask, so it sounds to me like Wynkoop is Shivington's Benteen.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay, sorry. I want to hear more. Go ahead.
And Wynkoop is very much on the side of the natives. And there's a great book out there on him called Wynkoop. And I highly recommend that book. I've read part of it. I don't actually have it. I borrowed it from the library up there at Fort Laramie. But I don't actually have it, but it is a great book. So anyway, once Wynkoop's out of the way, there's nothing really to slow Shivington down. And it's worth kind of talking about what Shivington has done at this point. So Shivington, he's somewhat a district commander at this point. When he first come out to Colorado and joined the volunteers, and he was given his commission as an officer, he's going to get fame at a little place that we call the Gettysburg of the West, which is at Glorietta Pass. He's successfully going to turn what would have been the Confederate invasion of Colorado, because the Confederacy, desperate for gold and silver, had thought that they could come up to Colorado and harvest the gold and silver that was being mined here. And it's also worth noting that at that point in time, The state of Colorado was very similar to the state of Missouri in the fact of who was on what side. It was about evenly divided in the state as to whether it was going to be pro-Union or pro-Confederacy. And people like Uncle Dick Wooten, they were pro-Confederacy. Most of your guys that are living out in the countryside, it's the folks that are living in Denver that are pro-Union. And so to kind of keep, to prevent the Confederacy from coming out there, Shivington, along with, a couple other regiments, and I cannot remember who all was in this one. Like I said, I'm trying to pull this one from memory. I don't have my reference book here on this, but Shivington's going to go down there. He's going to make an attack that's going to rout a section of that Confederate advance, and it's going to stop the Confederate advance. They're not going to make it into Colorado territory. They're going to turn back and head back into Texas, and that's pretty much the last excursion out in the West. Now, there were Southerners that did come up and try to recruit. There were Southerners that came up to operate kind of as saboteurs, if you will, get the local populace started up, commandos, if you want. And Shivington's going to wind up capturing them and hang them. And then that kind of puts an end to those depredations, if you will. So at this point in time, Shivington's a war hero. And if he would have just stayed with that, he would have maintained that hero status. But, he at this point, he's alongside with Evans, and they decide that they're going to chastise and get rid of the Cheyennes and the Arapahos in the area. And so in November, they start pushing their plans forward. And Black Kettle, the Arapahoes, they're out at Sand Creek. They're waiting for the army to come in to escort them into Fort Lyon so they can start their peace negotiations, get their supplies, their rations, and such. And at the end of November, Shivington heads down to Fort Lyon. He's going to have the 3rd Colorado Cavalry and the 1st Colorado, and I cannot remember all the units off the top of my head. I'm sorry. Like I said, I didn't do my homework this weekend. So they're going to start an all-night march, 40 miles through the night from Fort Lyon up to where Black Kettle's camp is at on Sand Creek. Now, the Arapaho, just before this, had decided that they were tired of waiting for the government to come get them. They were running low on food. So they decided they were going to go out. They were going to leave Sand Creek. The morning of the 29th of November 1864, Black Kettle's village wakes up. It's just another day. The women go because Sand Creek, even though here in Colorado we call them creeks, they don't always have water in them. They're dry most of the year. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen water in Sand Creek. And not that I've spent a lot of time on that creek, but I've never seen water in it. And so they're having to go a little further to the east to get water. But as the village starts to wake up and starts to stir, they notice off in the distance dark figures on the hillside. Their first impression is that it's a herd of buffalo. And so, they have the criers, essentially the messengers, go through the camp and say the buffalo are coming. And the people get excited. They haven't seen buffalo for a long time at this point. Buffalo in Colorado had been pushed out, in this part anyway, for quite a while. And a lot of that was due to William Bent's trading operation. The amount of buffalo that they were harvesting and the pressure they put on them just pushed the buffalo out of the area. And so the village gets excited, but as it draws closer to them, that's when they realize that it's not buffalo, it's soldiers. And so there's a little bit of panic starts to go through, but Black Kettle reassures the people. He says, we were told if we flew an American flag and a white flag in our camp that we would be safe. And on Black Kettle's teepee, he had the American flag and he had a white flag. And not to worry that the soldiers were coming there to escort him to Fort Lyon. As the soldiers approach up, the 3rd Colorado Cavalry, which at this point had been called the Bloodless Third because they had not seen an entire engagement. They were running up on the end of their enlistment. They're going to get sent out to the west side to basically run off the horse herd because Shivington doesn't want them to be able to escape. So the 3rd goes over. The rest of the troops line up on the village. And then there's different stories of kind of what happens next. But it's said that the soldiers are sent in to the village and that White Antelope and several of the other chiefs come out to the outside of the village, just on the edge of it, to meet with the troops to see what's going on. And several accounts say that this is a point where White Antelope is going to be killed. The soldiers run up and just shooting. And that's when all-out panic and this terror just takes over. So the attack begins. Shivington had brought with him 4 mountain howitzers, the 12-pound mountain howitzers. 2 of them I know for sure were set up on Monument Hill. I know the other 2 wound up over on the other side of the little valley there. And the artillery starts to fire down into the village. And it's worth noting that they did do some excavations and they supposedly found some cannonballs. The fuses had never been punched on the cannonballs. So the cannonballs that they were firing, the shell or spherical case shot, was rendered essentially useless at that point because they were acting a solid ball. And solid ball is not a good anti-personnel round. But cannons are discharging, and this is complete chaos. You have soldiers in the camp with the cannons discharging into the camp. And as the gunfire starts up, the Bloodless Third realizes, hey, we're missing out on this battle again because we're over here messing around with the horses. So they're going to disregard orders. They're going to leave the horse herd, and they're going to come riding in to the middle of it and add more to the chaos. At this point, like I said, it is a complete chaos show, and the soldiers are not caring who they kill. They're killing indiscriminately, men, women, children. And at one point, there is an account of a soldier saying that, or somebody, I can't remember who it was, said that at one point they watched a soldier take a shot at a small child that was sitting next to his mother that had been killed. And several soldiers took a shot at him until finally one of them hit the little boy or the child and killed him. And at this point, the Cheyennes are trying to make their escape to the north. They're following the creek bed of Sand Creek. Now, Sand Creek gets its name because if you've never been to this area of Colorado is extremely sandy. And so the bed of Sand Creek, it's sand. As the Cheyennes make their way north, they try to bury themselves in the sand to hide. There's also places along the cliffs where you have little cutouts. They try to hide in there. The soldiers just follow them along and shoot them. And it said that the soldiers would ride along through the creek bottom, and when they could see the sand moving from the people breathing, they would just start shooting into it and kill a lot of people that way. When it's all said and done, it's going to be anywhere from 165 to the other estimate I've seen is upwards of the mid 200s men, women, and children that are going to be dead. So it was an outright indiscriminate massacre. But the real atrocities are going to start after. And that's when the soldiers, basically taking the native warfare side of things with mutilation, they start to mutilate the bodies. And I'm not going to, because somebody mentioned that they had a kid in here, I'm not going to mention what all was done. But it was barbaric, to say the least. Body parts were taken off. Some body parts, used to tobacco sacks, just raunchy, inhumane things were done.
Mm-hmm.
After the battle, there were some that were captured. John Smith, who had been a prominent trader with the Bent St. Grain Company, one of William Bent's top employees, had lived with the Cheyenne for a long time. He was married in. He was at the village. He had been living with them for a long time. His wife was there. She's going to be killed. His son's there. His son is initially captured alive. And John Smith comes close to being killed. Soldiers take several shots at him before they're called off. And, they're held in a teepee, basically as prisoners, along with the Bent family. William Bent's half-breed children were there. And so John Smith's son, Jack Smith, he gets pulled out of that teepee and is killed, murdered in cold blood. And at this point, then Chivington wants to continue on and continue attacking the Cheyenne that were further north. It was probably a good thing that his troopers talked him out of it, because if he hadn't of, it would have been a little bighorn incident. Chivington would have been wiped out. He was vastly outnumbered. This was just a small band of probably close to 300 people. There was probably 13, 14, maybe 1,500, or if not more, Cheyenne living further north from there. And those Cheyenne aren't the peaceful Cheyenne. These are the ones that are pretty much out for a fight. They're the ones that want to fight.
Roman Nose is up there somewhere.
Roman Nose is up there. Several others whose names escape me. But as I said, William Bent's ties to the Cheyenne tie him right close to Sand Creek. His children are there. Young Charlie Bent, his son George, and his son Robert. Now, Robert had been with William at their ranch, not too far from where Los Animas, Colorado is now. But as the soldiers made their way to Sand Creek, they went to William Bent's ranch. They posted sentries there to make sure he did not leave, because they knew he was friendly to the Cheyenne. But they took Robert and basically at gunpoint and said, "You are going to take us to this village. You're going to show us where they're at." And so Robert Bent is going to lead them there. Now, the other scout that they had with them was Jim Beckworth. Now, Jim Beckworth, depending on what you believe on what he says, he had been allied with the Crow. Then he got in trouble with the Crow, and so he left them, went and joined the Cheyenne. The Cheyenne, when he came down, supposedly, this is his own words, you got to take it with a big grain of salt. He went to the Cheyenne, said, "I'm so-and-so. I've been with the Crow. I fought you. I've killed you. I've come here to join you or meet my death." And the Cheyenne said, "Well, Baines, you were honest and you didn't lie about who you were. We are going to welcome you." And, that's his words. I don't know if it actually worked out that way or not. But he is friendly with the Cheyenne. And for whatever reason, he decides to scout for Chivington leading up to the massacre here. Afterwards, he says, and again, take this with a grain of salt because Jim Beckworth, he says he leaves the army completely disgusted. That I have no doubt. There were a lot of people that were disgusted by it. It was a complete atrocity back then. And he says he goes and he finds the Cheyenne survivors afterwards to try to help them. And they said, "Why did you betray us? We don't want anything to do with you." And after that, he goes back to his Crow allies up north, and then he dies a few years later. But the Sand Creek Massacre is going to drive a wedge in William Bent's family relations, because his son Charlie basically says, "You're a white man. If I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you." And then Charlie goes on and fights and does some pretty gory things, and William Bent is going to disown him at that point because of it. Now, George Bent had been in the Confederate Army, and this is the reason why he's at Sand Creek and not with William. he was captured back east, and I forget which battle it was, but he was an artilleryman with the Confederate Army. He gets captured, and he gets paroled, and they send him back home. When he gets home, William Bent is afraid that the pro-Union folks in the area are going to want to kill George because of his Confederate ties, and so he tells him to go out to the camp, stay with the Cheyenne relatives, and he'd be safe out there. Of course, he had no idea that Chivington was going to attack this village. And so because of that attack, Robert, George, and Charlie are all going to join the Cheyennes, and they are going to fight. And they're going to fight like hell for the next couple of years. In fact, Charlie Bent is going to wind up getting killed in the later 1860s, somewhere in Kansas. Don't know exactly where, but he's killed and wounded. Of course, George and Robert survive, and George Bent's letters tell a lot of what happened with the Cheyenne and Sand Creek and things that happened afterwards.
You want to?
I got to take a little break there and get a water.
Yeah, I'm going to go through some of these comments from the bottom down, and then when we get done with that, you want to talk a little bit about the guns. Diane was wanting to know about the guns.
Yeah, we can get into that.
Okay, here's one from William Schossler. He said, how did Cheyenne know Roman nose to use that name?
So that was a name that was given to him by the whites, and I forget what his actual name was, but the Cheyenne basically adopted that name. So his native nickname, if you will, became Hook Nose. So sometimes you'll see him referenced as Hook Nose, is because of his prominent nose. But the Roman nose, that was actually a name given to him by the whites.
Martin Kavanaugh said arrived online from New Zealand. Is it Sunday afternoon in New Zealand right now? I think it is. Let's see.
Well, there's somebody else in here from New Zealand said they was going to go mow their lawn.
Yeah. We have quite a few New Zealand watchers.
So welcome to all y'all from New Zealand, by the way.
Oh, sorry. Gray Pilgrim said, I read the Wounded Knee telling. Hardy says,
another sad one.
Hardy says, sounds like something from the outlaw Josie Wales. Yeah, and I always want to just point out that the same people that did this to the Missouri people, like Josie Wales, are the same people that's running this show for the most part.
Yeah, no, Chivington is very much like a John Brown, Kansas Red Legs kind of thing.
Yeah, Jim Red Legs.
They are not, and try not to get political or anything, but, whether you see the Union as good or bad, Chivington, John Brown, and the Kansas Red Legs, they are all, the bad part of the Union Army.
Mm-hmm. You probably know more about this because you like that show more than I do. You're familiar with Centennial's version of this.
So Centennial, it's the Skimmerhorns, and they attack the Arapahoes. Centennial is based very much on what happens down this area. You can pick up parts of William Bent's lineage in there, and he used Bent and all those as the basis for his fictional characters.
Jolly Jake Lovell said 2 of Bent's sons were in the village.
Yeah, Charlie and George were in the village. Robert was forced to come to the village with Chivington to guide him. And then his daughter, William Bent's daughter, I cannot think of her name. Anyway, his daughter was there, and she, when the government, basically pays off the Cheyenne for the massacre a few years later, she gets a land plot that's going to include the section that Bent's old fort was on. And eventually that's going to change hands, and eventually the federal government gets a hold of it. But that was part of her. She got a land grant out of that. Several of the half-breed children. Now, Robert, George, and Charlie didn't, because at that time they were fighting the government. They were considered hostile. But
I think I might be a little hostile myself if I'd been through that.
And it's really bad for the Bent brothers, because they're of a mixed world.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're they're white. Their father sent them back east to be educated. And like I said, George joins the Confederate Army. But then they get attacked by the white world, and so it's like they wind up going with their native allies and staying with them. And eventually, when the Cheyenne are moved down to Oklahoma, they're going to be with them there as well.
Just so you know, we just hit 70 between the two channels. Guys,
All
keep
right.
inviting people. If we hit 100, maybe we'll do a giveaway or something someday.
Yeah.
iPod Walker's in. Hi, iPod. He said Gaul, ? I believe he's referring to where they, was he Northern Cheyenne with Roman nose?
Gaul was one of the, I don't believe he was, I'm trying to look this up. I know I've got the picture. It's got all the peace chiefs here. There we are.
See, I thought he was Sioux, but I could have been wrong.
Well, that's the thing. Sometimes you get names that cross over.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've got a picture. I got a picture from the Gardner photos from Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. Most of the natives that are in there are Sioux, but there's one picture, and they refer to the man as Hook Nose, who we know is also called Roman Nose, who is a Cheyenne, Southern Cheyenne. And so I don't know if he was there in 68 or if there was a Lakota by that same name. But yeah, it's not uncommon to see names. Yeah, it's just like in the modern world, names can be common. There's actually two Sitting Bulls.
You said Jack Smith, and I instantly thought of somebody I know. You know, that's
there's two Sitting Bulls. There's the Sitting Bull, the Hunkpapa, and then there was also Sitting Bull, the Oglala, and the Sitting Bull, the Oglala, was also called Pax's Drum. Was that the same Hunkpapa they sang about in Elvira? I don't know.
Okay, Stephen M said it's not a kid-friendly image.
No.
Great.
Yeah.
Gray Pilgrim said Sand Creek was brutal. And guys, I'm just kind of skimming through here. West T said, shout out to Josh at Wild West Extravaganza. Yeah, we had him on a few weeks ago.
Yep.
He's really good.
So I do have the picture here of the Peace Chiefs. The problem is that it only points out Black Kettle and White Antelope, and Nava, Bull Bear, but and then it points out Wine Coop and Silas Soul, and then John Smith is in the back. And this was taken at Denver in 1864. So that's the picture there.
Yeah.
And if you're wondering, Black Kettle is the one directly behind Wine Coop, who's under my middle finger there.
Okay.
So it's also worth mentioning that during an attack, not all the soldiers participated in the atrocities that took place. So Silas Soul was in command of a company, and he was about to give the order to attack the village. And I forget his exact words, but it went along the lines of, y'all know why we're here, to chastise these Indians. And one of his soldiers pops off and says, no, we're not. And he looks back and he says, no, we are not here to do this. And they stand. They do not attack or participate in the attack on the village. And Silas Soul is called in to testify. He gives a pretty descriptive account of the atrocities that happened. But he's going to be murdered in Denver, in the streets of Denver, probably by, I no doubt in my mind, it was by friends of Shivington, if not friends of Governor Evans.
Which brings us right to this next comment by William Schlossler. He said, Shivington, Glorieta Pass, more drunks from Colorado. Sorry, just saying. Okay, so Doug Murray, he's had a couple pretty good questions in here. This one's going to be a tough one. Are you ready for a tough one?
I'm ready.
So who did more damage to the tribes in the long run, Indian agents or the Army?
The Army damage, it was swift and brutal, but in the long run, there were agents that did do more damage in the long run. So
Custer
it's kind of
didn't
one of
even
those
like the
things.
agents.
It's the quick, destructive damage or the long, drawn out, toxic or poisonous damage, if you will.
Mm-hmm. That pretty well, let me go back up here and hide the comment. That pretty well got us through outside of, let me see here. I'm down here at the bottom. Christopher Mead said, oh, AR American's in. Yes. He said,
Hey,
Stephen
AR.
and Jay. He said, good evening. There's a few things here I want to click on. Let's see. Christopher Mead said, the peaceful make an easy target. Shivington is just another war criminal.
Yeah, and Shivington is not going to be prosecuted because he basically gets out of the Army before they can do anything. And once he's a civilian, they just don't bother.
Yeah. iPod Walker says, it's my belief that Cheyenne and Sioux mix frequently.
There was mixings, yes. But even by this point, the Southern Cheyenne and the Northern Cheyenne had really become two distinct bands. And the Northern Cheyenne are tied much more closely to the Lakota, the Sioux. The Southern Cheyenne, they still have those ties as well. But Sand Creek is kind of going to be that point of where you see that Cheyenne break between the Northern and the Southern Plains Indian Wars.
Yeah. Stephen M. votes agents for suffering. Okay, so you ready to get into the guns at Sand Creek?
Yeah, so let's talk some on the guns here. I was going to see if I could find another picture, but I don't think I'm going to find the one I'm looking for in this book.
Are you looking for a Star Carbine?
No. I was actually looking for some of the other.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, that's not Roman nose. So anyway, yeah, we'll get into the guns there. So when the 3rd Colorado Cav got organized, I think the 1st Colorado Cav were issued Star carbines. And if you're not familiar with a Star carbine, it's pretty much a copy of a Sharps. But it has some differences. Yeah, Garrett's got it right there. And so I've actually got to see and handle a Star carbine that took part in the Sand Creek Massacre. It had gotten donated back to the site, which it's a National Historic Site now. They used a Star carbine. They were also issued Colt 1860 Armies. And they had gotten those from Fort Union down in Mexico. And Garrett's got an airsoft version there to show. So that's predominantly what you're going to see there.
Cap and ball stuff at this point in time.
Yeah, it's all cap and ball.
I always get confused. I think Indian Wars, I think cartridge, but I always have to stop and think early Indian Wars, still cap and ball.
Right.
I don't have a carbine, but you want me to read a little paragraph basically about the carbine? I got the manual here.
Yeah,
this is the 1864 Manual of Arms for the carbine, the Star carbine. It said, this is written to agents of the Star Arms Company by A.J. Alexander, Lieutenant Colonel of the AAG Volunteers. It's just a short paragraph. He said, sir, having examined the Star pistol and carbine, I have found no hesitation in saying, in my opinion, that the carbine is equally as well made as Sharps, and I believe it has many advantages over that weapon, the principal of which is that your carbine, there is no escape of gas whatsoever at the breech, and that the load can be carried in the carbine without losing the powder. I believe that with some changes which do not affect the principle on which it works, that it will prove the most effective carbine that I have ever seen. The large pistol is the best for Army use that I have and has been pronounced by all cavalry officers with whom I have conversed. I am respectfully yours, Sir A.G. Alexander, Lieutenant Colonel, AAG Volunteers. Interesting little thing. I never read that before just now, so I just happened to see it.
And that's one thing the Sharps was notorious about, having a flash.
Leaking gas.
The seal system did not seal all that well. But yeah, that's predominantly what's going to be used. Unfortunately, it's used, and as they said, the peaceful village are the ones that get targeted and have the massacres, and it's unfortunately, but that's exactly what happened here. So as the Cheyenne kind of escape Sand Creek, they are going to make their way north, basically, to the other groups. And at this point, Black Kettle has been very much a peace chief. And Black Kettle is of a division of the Cheyenne that was starting to really fade away. And I'm going to screw up the pronunciation of this, but he was I think it was a Shutai, which was kind of a separate band, but then it got mixed in, and so they weren't really a prominent band anymore. They had pretty well mixed in between the northern and the southern bands. But he'd always been for peace, but at this point he realizes that peace isn't going to happen. And so he very reluctantly agrees that, the Cheyenne have to go on the warpath at this point. And basically what's going to happen is that the Cheyenne are going to get organized. They're going to go to the Lakota and ask them to join in, and basically their retaliatory war. And whether or not groups of Cheyenne and Lakota had been for peace, at this point they're all starting to get on the bandwagon for fighting. And so that's going to lead into basically the Indian War of 1865. Now keep in mind that everything that's taken place through 1864, the small little Indian skirmishes, Sand Creek Massacre, and what's going to take place in 1865, in the first part of 1865, it's going to also be what's known as the Colorado War. And so that kind of groups that whole line of attacks and such that take place between 64 and 65, and really even into early 1863. And so the natives get organized, and the first thing that they're going to do in the early months of 1865 is they're going to attack the town of Julesburg. And they're going to attack not too far from Julesburg, about a mile away, was a military fort, which was called Fort Sedgwick. It was also, I think, called Fort Ranker. I cannot remember off the top of my head. But they're going to attack there. And in this attack, it's the first retaliation against Sand Creek. And, as you see, William Schlosser gave us $20. All right. Thanks.
Cool.
Appreciate it. So anyway, there's going to be their first retaliatory.
You messed up his train of thought. He ain't never got $20 before. We really do appreciate that.
So they attack the military fort. That's the first thing they target. They are not as concerned about the town initially as they are attacking the military fort. They are out to basically gut the army. So the commanding officer, and I can't remember his name, but the commanding officer at Fort Sedgwick had several cannons in play. And as the attack begins, the people of Julesburg make their way to the fort. They get into safety. The commanding officer orders that the cannons be loaded with 1/3 and 1/2 charges. And they start firing. Now, it's worth noting that the Indians have with them Robert, George, and Charles Bent, and George Bent was in the Confederate artillery. And so they have an idea. They have people amongst them that have that experience with whites, so they become war leaders in their own right. But when the commanding officer orders 1/2 and 1/3 charges, the shells are not reaching their full extent, and it's going to give the natives that false sense of security of how close they can get to the fort. And their idea is they want to draw the soldiers out, because if they draw the soldiers out from the fort, then they can kill them outside of it. But once the natives get in that false sense of security and they get within range, then the commanding officer orders full-on charges, and then the shells start dropping in amongst them. And then the Indians back off and they start to rethink things. And as they're rethinking things, they realize the town of Julesburg is abandoned. Nobody's in there right now. The soldiers aren't coming out. So they go full rain. They raid the town of Julesburg. They burn it. And after the fact, the soldiers said they were able to track and find where the village had been at from the trails of flour and corn left behind from all the supplies that they'd hauled off. And for a while, the Cheyenne and the Arapaho and this few Lakotas that had joined them successfully managed to shut down the mail between California and New York. They start sending the mail by ship around South America because it's not safe to take it across overland. And so they successfully cut communications. They successfully stall transport of goods, of food items. And that had even happened earlier on in 1863 when I was reading the book, The Indian War of 1864 by Fitch. He mentions how supplies were hard to come by because the wagon trains wouldn't come across unless they had an armed escort. And so they successfully shut things down. But as the government starts to put more pressure in, they start bringing more troops in. They make their way north into Nebraska. And I'm not going to get too much into the northern part of this section, but they are going to attack Rush Creek Station, which is a stage station. There is going to be another battle not too far from there at Mud Springs, where their camp was at. But they realize at that point that the only safe place for them to go is to head up to the Powder River country and eastern Wyoming. And they head up there in that region, and you're going to have a lot of battles up there. The big one's the Battle of Platte River Bridge. You'll have the Connor Expedition. You'll have several others. But at one point during one of the little skirmishes, a small detail of soldiers is going to encounter the Cheyenne with George, Robert, and Charlie there. And they decide that instead of fighting, maybe it's time we sit down and talk. And so this officer, pretty much tells him, he says, I don't have the authority to make any kind of a peace agreement, but what do you think? What would you want to bring an end to this conflict? Because the government doesn't want to deal with this. They're still dealing with remnants of the Civil War. And the Bent brothers pretty much said, the thing that will bring an end to this war is when you hang John Shivington. That's it. And of course, the officer says, well, I cannot promise that, but I will take that info back to my, commanders and such. And the Indians say, well, for us to part peacefully, will you give us some goods, some rations? And the commanding officer agrees, provides them with rations. And then this is where you find out what kind of a person Charlie Bent really is. He's a very hateful, just not a real nice kid. And that gets noted quite a bit because after the private gives him the goods, Charlie Bent pulls out his revolver and kills him. And then they ride off. So the whole good deed and, let's have an agreement, see if we can bring in that. Charlie pretty well squashed any chance that there might have been any consideration for peace at that point. And, that war is going to continue on through the end of 1865, and then it's going to lead up into Red Cloud's War. But moving back down into the Southern Plains, the battles, the skirmishes are going to continue to take place, but they're not going to be so much in Colorado as they're going to move now towards Kansas. And the Cheyenne, as they are being moved from their territory under the 1851 treaty, pretty much been everything between the Arkansas River and the North Platte. And the Lakota had everything to the north side of the North Platte. That had gotten whittled down to this tiny little fraction of land that was, cut through the middle by Sand Creek. Well, when all this is said and done, tempers kind of come down a little bit. The government goes out for another peace treaty. They say, okay, we're going to move your reservation so that we don't have future conflicts. We're going to move you out of Colorado. They're going to move them into southern Kansas, kind of the area about where Garrett's at, not too far from there. And that's when you're going to have the Medicine Lodge Treaty there of, what was that, 1867, Garrett?
1868.
1868. So 1867, 1868, they're going to be down there in that area. And there's going to be more conflict because the Cheyenne, there's still that division at this point between peace chiefs and non-peace chiefs. They're going to continue to fight. And eventually they're going to be moved once again. And this time they're going to move them down into Oklahoma along the Washita River. Mm-hmm. And so even though things have quieted down, there's still a lot of fighting going on. Hostilities have not ceased at this point. And in 1868, you're going to have a lot of conflicts going on. You're going to have the Kettle Massacre. You're going to have the Battle of Beecher Island. So that's with Forsyth scouts. And what had happened there is that Forsyth, I forgot his rank off the top of my head, but Forsyth was given the orders to round up basically 100 scouts, civilians, all armed with Spencer carbines to help fight the hostile Cheyennes at this point. And they are patrolling out western Kansas and the very edges of eastern Colorado. And they're going to be attacked by Roman Nose and a bunch of the southern Cheyennes. And Charlie Bent is there, of course. George Bent's there. And so with the Battle of Beecher Island, of course, the scouts wind up down in this little creek on this little island, surrounded by, up to 1,000 Cheyenne is the highest estimate that I can remember off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. And so these men get bogged down, and they ain't going anywhere. And it's at this battle that Roman Nose is going to meet his demise. Now, Roman Nose had claimed that he was impervious to bullets. There was a special, I don't want to put it, special thing that he would do, the ceremonial practice he would do, and he would be immune to bullets. And at the end of it, he's going to ride in and be shot and killed. And when that happens, the battle's going to pretty well wane off at that point, because when a leader gets killed, that kind of is a sign of bad medicine, if you will. Yeah. And so they're going to start rethinking things. At this point, they get away. A couple of men manage to escape under the cover of darkness to try to get help. And it's the Buffalo Soldiers that are going to come in and save the day. And at this point in time, there was a lot of racism. Nobody wanted to deal with the Buffalo Soldiers because they were all black. But I guarantee you those guys at Beecher Island were pretty happy to see him coming to the rescue after that debacle. Because the men were amongst, dead mules. They were happy to eat dead mules. At one point, if I remember right, there was an account of a guy drinking the blood of a mule because they ran out of water. Mm-hmm. They were low on ammunition and
eating rotten horse meat.
Yeah, and if you've never been to Beecher Island, you are in the bottom of a little pit. Of course, the island is long gone. It's been lost to nature. Yeah, but I mean, you're down in the bottom. Everybody's up around you. That is not a defensible position whatsoever. Yeah. And these men managed to hold out there.
Okay, so Ethan just corrected me. So it was in 67 that the
That's what I thought. Yeah.
I don't know why I said 68, but
yeah, because Roman Knows that's the one where he said, "I'm not signing any peace treaty. I'm going to keep fighting." Yeah, iPod Walker just made a comment down there about he ate from a metal spoon. There were strange taboos and stuff and beliefs that went on back then.
You want to talk about the Spencer at this point?
Yeah, we can talk about the Spencer. So
airsoft.
Got this nice airsoft Spencer there to represent. So at this point in time in firearms history, you have two repeating rifle options. You've got the Henry and you've got the Spencer. Now, there were Henrys used by the military, but the Henry was not formally adopted by the military. Basically, units could buy them if they wanted to. But the Spencer was adopted by the military at this point. And so, the scouts there at Beecher's Island, they're going to have the Spencer carbines, and they're also going to be issued Blakesley boxes, which, from what I've seen on research, there actually wasn't a lot of the Blakesley boxes issued. It's not 100% clear as to whether it was the 6-tube Blakesley box, the 7-tube Blakesley box, or the 11-tube Blakesley box, because apparently there was 3 different variations. But the Blakesley box was carried. It had a shoulder strap, and then it went on your belt, and it basically sit right here. Mm-hmm. And I've actually worn one, and they are the most uncomfortable thing to have to mess with. But you would carry the Spencer, in this hand. And the nice thing about a Spencer, the way it's built, it's very back heavy, which makes it very easy to shoot off the back of a horse one-handed.
I never thought of that.
Yeah, you can shoot it off the back of a horse, put it in your shoulder, and it's very easy to control because all the weight's to the back. And so the way they do that, load it, you would take the tube out, you'd reach over, you grab a tube out of the Blakesley box, dump that down the magazine.
7 shots of 5650 in this tube, by the way.
Right.
And you could have basically 7 interchangeable magazines.
Right.
On you.
Loads.
Did you say it was a 6 or 7 that carried the Blakesley box carried?
Well, there was a variation of a 6-tube, there was a variation of a 7-tube, and a variation of 11-tube, and each tube held 7 shots.
So just so you guys know, of course, this is rimfire. This is in the rimfire era. This model that he's talking about comes out in 65, but it's really only a few modifications from the one that came out in 1860. So what you're dealing with here is that I showed you before. You can take the 7-shot 50 caliber tube out, put 7 shots in this thing, and what it is a lever action rifle. The main drawback you have on this compared to your Henry is you saw I put the hammer at half cock. This is a lever action. You'll open it up, it'll kick one out, it'll put one in, but the main drawback is you do have to cock the hammer back, which is one more step than the Henry where you can just, but it's way better than a muzzleloader in 1868.
And that was one of the things where the Army didn't want to use a Henry because they was afraid soldiers would just burn up their ammo. Whereas that one, you actually have to take your time with the running the mechanism. So,
the only other thing I was going to say is this compared to the Henry, 5650 is actually a 55 grain charge behind a 350 grain bullet in this. So twice the power of the Henry in this.
It's going to be harder hitting, but it's also a little shorter range.
That's true. And it doesn't have the best sights.
No.
Okay, I'm done. Go ahead.
Sorry. All right. So after Beecher Island, there's still going to be lots of conflict going on. But at this point, Sherman and Sheridan are done with it. They do not want to deal with it anymore. And Sheridan gets the idea for a winter campaign. And so there's going to be a 3-pronged attack that they're planning. And they know that the Cheyenne have been camped down along the Washita. Because at this point, a lot of the depredations that are happening are up along the Arkansas River. So the Cheyenne are coming up, hitting, and then going back to that reservation down along the Washita. And so one of those sections is going to be the relatively new formed 7th Cavalry. So the 7th Cavalry has not been around for very long. They get started in 1867. They do spend a little time at Fort Larned. But they're going to be sent down to the Washita. And initially, Major Elliott is in command, but then Custer, takes over. And they're going to be sent down as one of the 3 prongs. And Custer's given the orders, kill every man capable of holding an arm, capture the women and children, burn the lodges, burn the food stores, kill the horses. Basically a forced capitulation. And so Custer has with him Lonesome Charlie Reynolds. He has Comanche Jack Stillwell, civilian scouts. They have with them some Osage scouts, and Osages have been enemies of the Cheyenne for a long time, same as, as the Pawnees and such. And so almost 4 years to the day, Custer is going to approach Black Kettle's village on the Washita. And at this point, Black Kettle has been pushing for peace once again. However, after Sand Creek, he's lost a lot of clout that he once had. He's still a very respected man, but the peace idea is nowhere near as strong as it had been. And that's because of the Sand Creek Massacre. The natives just don't trust the government. And so Custer's going to come in on that morning, and where Black Kettle's village is at, it's not too dissimilar from the Little Bighorn setup. Black Kettle's village is the last in a line of about 5 different villages. The only thing is they're scattered out over about 5 miles along the Washita River. And so Custer is going to attack at dawn. Once again, Black Kettle's village is sleeping. They have no idea what's going on. They're awakened by the pony herd. They're also awakened by the sound of music because Custer's got them playing Gary Owen as they go marching in, so he looks all glorious and fancy.
Favorite song.
And so they go in and they attack Black Kettle. At this point he's trying to sue for peace, but it's going to be not the same scale of a disaster as what Sand Creek was, but it's going to still be an atrocity. It's going to be an atrocity. Not a full-on same level massacre, but still it's a bad event. And so troopers were given the orders at the very beginning not to fire on women and children. And in the confusion, and soldiers that just didn't care, a lot of women and children do get killed. Now, Major Elliott, kind of like in how Reno gets ordered in, gets sent to basically keep the natives from escaping. And he's going to take his company, and his company is going to get wiped out. Now, Custer's plan is to get in the middle of the village, capture as many non-combatants as he can, and then mix them through his command, because at that point, the natives aren't going to fire on his troops if their wives, their sisters, their children, their nieces, their nephews are mixed in amongst soldiers. They're not going to fire on them out of fear of hitting their own people. And so this is the only reason Custer walks away from the Washita alive, is because he manages to successfully capture the non-combatants and get them staggered throughout the command. But as this battle's going on, Custer realizes he is in trouble, because those 5 other villages along the Washita have heard the battle going on, and now they're starting to line the hilltops, little mountains that are surrounding it. And yeah, that part of Wyoming, there are some mountains, not mountains like you get in Colorado, but it is more rugged country. So Custer starts to get a little bit nervous. Captain Benteen informs him that Major Elliott has not been seen since Major Elliott went to pursue escaping hostiles, if you will. And Custer says, well, we don't have time to go look for him. We got to get out of here. And Benteen is not very enthused, because him and Elliott were friends. And they wind up finding out later that, Elliott did get wiped out. His company did get pretty much wiped out there, not too far away. But Custer's going to make his escape back to Fort Supply, where they're going to keep the captives out there. And then supposedly he has relations with a Cheyenne woman. Whether or not it was actually him or his brother Tom, we're not quite sure. But she did give birth to a blonde-headed child that died not too long after the fact. The child didn't live for very long. But that's one of the things that the Cheyennes kind of referred to Custer as a relative, because supposedly he did father a child with that woman. More than likely, if that did happen, he probably forced himself upon her. And so that's going to be really what gets that Southern Plains Indian Wars really going for this time period. And being that the Southern Cheyenne have been sent to Oklahoma, they had been enemies with the Comanche and the Kiowa, but during William Bent's time, they had made peace, because William Bent said, If you're not fighting, you're out killing buffalo, and then you can bring in and get more goods. Basically, if you're not fighting, I can make more money off you. But he manages to get them to stop fighting amongst themselves to an extent. Once they get established down there, they're going to become close allies. And that's going to continue on through the Buffalo War, if you will, the Red River War, the Southern Plains Wars that are going to take place in the 1870s, about the same time that the Northern Plains battles are taking place.
You want to take a break here for just a second?
Yeah, let's take a little break here.
Okay. Stephen M. said, nice pup. Here, kitty. Yeah, that's Colt. You know, he used to always walk through here, and I never saw him on camera. I just noticed today, this is the first time he walked through here, and I could see him on camera, so I guess he's getting big.
He's missing me. He gets to be on the couch when I'm there.
Yeah. William Schlosser said, 2nd, 7th Cav was in Korea. Just saying.
Yeah, and the 7th was in Vietnam, too.
Yeah, Cole's camera shot. He knows not to get on the couch unless Duke's here. If Duke's here, then he'll jump all over the couch because he knows Duke will let him.
He gets to snuggle up to me and get pets.
Swim as fast as you can from New Zealand. I just realized we've had 3 people from New Zealand in here, unless Swim as Fast as You Can has 3 different accounts. Sunday there. Saboteur wants to know why you don't have the Henry air.
Oh, it's currently sitting in the safe, and I didn't think to grab it.
Yeah. Stephen M. Mann says Buffalo Soldiers a tough regiment.
They were a very tough regiment.
And you already addressed this one, but iPod
Yep.
Walker said he was killed because a woman fed him with an iron spoon. His mojo was no metal for food prep. He had a low iron diet.
Some of and you get into some of the natives' beliefs on taboos and stuff. There's 2 great books out there. They're by George Bird Grinnell. It's the Cheyenne Encyclopedias, Volume 1 and 2, and they talk about some of that stuff. And there's definitely some interesting things. And one of the things I find funny is, with Catholics, if they break a taboo, they just go to mass. And the Cheyenne beliefs, from what I read in that one, is like if you broke a taboo, the way you got past that is you had to go eat the heart of an enemy that you killed. And they said, you broke a taboo once and then you fixed it and you never wanted to ever do that again.
Well, think about Tecumseh. His deal had something to do with touching the ramrod from a Northwest trade gun. I can't remember exactly how that went down. Somebody in the chat, I'm sure, knows. Gray Pilgrim left. William Schlosser up here said, deal, I'd trade Chivington for a few arrowheads or maybe a nice trade rifle.
Right. What's interesting is that Sand Creek Massacre is just outside of the town of Chivington, Colorado. And Chivington, Colorado, it's not a big town. It's a few houses. I don't even think they have a post office there anymore. But there's been a lot of talk, with a lot of the name change stuff that they wanted to change the name of that to something else. And at the time that I was working at Bent's, the Southern Cheyenne were opposed to changing that name because they wanted everybody to know who the heck Chivington was, and they want people to know what he did. And so, that's one of the reasons the town's name has not changed. But, it's kind of, I don't know which word you'd actually use for that, but whoever thought of the idea of naming the town that right outside the massacre site, they weren't thinking very clearly.
Once again, the plea has been made.
Working on one.
Write a book. He is. I was talking to him about it last night.
I started writing stuff down last night. Got an introduction all typed out. Or not last night, a couple nights ago. Got an introduction all typed out. So I'm working on it.
So we talked about this last night, but on your book, are you looking at a compilation of other stories, other authors, or are you planning on going for what's the word I'm looking for? Primary documents.
It's kind of going to be a mix. Basically, it's not so much a focus on any individual. It's kind of a compiled information. So kind of like what Doug Dukes did on his Firearms of the Texas Ranger book. Just trying to put a bunch of sources, a bunch of information that's spread out over a lot into a single volume.
Yes.
And the more I think about it, the more I write, I'm thinking I'm going to have to break it into a book series. Because the book is the scout, it's going to be on the scouts, civilian scouts. And then I was thinking if that's successful, I might do one on the Indian scouts, because really each group deserves its own separate book.
So what about military scouts? Is there such a thing?
Well, yeah,
we always talk about
the civilians or the Indians.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. So we always talk about civilian scouts. So what's the difference?
Yeah, so that's how you differentiate the scouts. Is the civilian scouts, that's your Anglos. Indian scouts are your Native Americans that are hired. And a lot of times they're going to operate under a chief scout. So like it was Mitch Boyer was the one that kind of run the Arikaras up there at Little Bighorn, if memory serves me 100% correct. But a lot of times they'd be put under the watch of a white civilian scout that had experience with that group. During the 1865 campaign that takes place up there in the Powder River, Frank and is it Peter North? God, I can't think of it. Frank North and his brother run a bunch of Pawnee scouts up there in that area. And they got their start in northern Kansas. They were actually freighters. They get commissioned, but they're commissioned in. They're not hired as civilian scouts. They're commissioned as officers in charge of the scouts. And that's kind of how Forsyth Scouts worked, is that he was an officer that was in charge of a bunch of civilian scouts. Whereas later on, they just hire a civilian to be in charge of them.
William Schlosser wants to know, did the Ute play any role in any of these actions?
No, not so much, because the Ute, at this point, they're pretty well over on the western slope of Colorado. They did have some to-doings over in this part of Colorado, because what they do is they go up in the mountains in the winter, or in the summer, come down the plains in the summertime, and they did wipe out the El Pueblo, where the town of Pueblo, Colorado is now. There was a trading post there. I think it was the Christmas Day of 1854, if memory serves me right. They attacked that Pueblo and wipe it out, and it really doesn't get going again until the city of Pueblo starts back up. But the Utes, they were in the area, but they, at this point, are not taking a big part in that. They have pretty well been over on the western slope at that point.
Yeah, there's a pretty good podcast on that. I don't know a lot about the guy, but Doris the Walrus did a pretty good podcast on the Christmas Day Massacre.
Yeah, he's got a good one. In fact, I just found a book too. It was on Amazon that gets about that. And there was the White River Massacre. Took place over on the western slope of Colorado. It's not too far from where their Ute reservation is now over there. But the Ute definitely, they were a dominant role about the time that the Cheyenne are coming in as well. And at one point they reached out to William Bent to trade, and then there's an interesting story that goes on there. So, in the 1840s, they were still coming out here into this area, but they were definitely more of a mountain tribe and definitely more prominent on the western slope.
And he said, thanks for your work. And I believe that went along with his $20 super sticker.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah. Hardy said, I just realized this is the first time I've seen Garrett in a t-shirt. As the weather gets warmer here, this corner of my house is not heated or air conditioned. And so in the winter, I wear vests and sleeves and about everything I can wear. As summer comes around, you'll see me in t-shirts more often. Unless I'll probably dress up a little more for these things, but
I think the only thing that's really heated in your house is the kitchen, ain't it?
Yeah, pretty much. Which that's the way I like it. I sleep good cold. I've always slept good cold. So, okay, this one's for me, and Here, iPod Walker said, "Hey Garrett, why didn't the early plainsmen use rifles like Hall 1812 for rapid reloading?" And I know Duke's got answers to this too. I'm not an expert on the 1812. I've spent some considerable time around an 1819. Never shot it, but I've been around it quite a bit. I know enough of the history to know that if that rifle, which was made by, I believe, both Springfield and Harper's Ferry for a while, but had that rifle been very usable, it would have been a main infantry service weapon. But it leaked gas worse than the Sharps. It would spray you. All accounts I've read, especially of the 19, where
Right.
it would spray you with gas. Like, it was bad, and that's why it was never a full service rifle. And the one that I was around, it had more of a cylinder gap than a Colt does between the front of the block and the breech. And so it was that particular rifle. Not only that, there's this issue a lot of people don't realize, and that is the fact that when the military gets something, even if it has issues like that, if they think it's something they like and they're going to hang on to it, they don't surplus that stuff out right away. They always surplus out the stuff that they feel is absolutely not usable first, or a little more outdated. So if they thought they could use it, even if it was leaking gas, they weren't going to surplus that right away. So. And it's very expensive, whereas a lot of other guns are expensive. But guys that are in the, in the early plainsmen, nobody else has repeating firepower for the most part at that point. So why do you need it? Is what they're thinking.
Right.
Go something cheap. Go with a smoothbore. Go with a trade rifle. Something versus something that you may not be able to get a hold of because it's not surplus. B, if you could, it would be really expensive. And C, it's going to be a whole new system you're not used to operating and could have some serious detriments like spraying gas back in your face. And I know Duke has some stories on Halls, how the Texas Rangers used them, so I'll let him talk about that.
It was the Dragoons that used them.
Yeah.
So, the early Halls, the flintlock Halls, were not good guns. They just weren't. And you don't see a lot of reference to them out west. And I don't know if that's because the military got them all or if they were just that bad that nobody wanted to use them. And plus, they're more expensive than a Northwest trade gun and less reliable, so buy a Northwest trade gun. But during the Mexican-American War, they did actually get to be pretty decent guns. But the thing is that with a Hall, you could take that breech block system out, and it contains the entire firing mechanism. And so troopers would take that out, and if they was going like a Fandango during the Mexican War, they'd put it in their pockets for a little concealed carry. The thing of it is that those things had a bad habit of going off in your pocket. And there were a couple troops that got killed because they'd have that in their pocket, and it'd shoot and it'd go off and hit them in the groin and hit that artery. They were done. And in fact, it got to the point where the Army told them, do not take that block out and put it in your pocket.
Yeah, you start to see references to square pocket pistols. That's what I told Ethan. I was like, that. By the way, that's actually a full Hall rifle. They just shoved it right in their pocket. Just took the breech out. But okay, so we had a few more here. William Schlosser. Shevington probably had a Remington. Such a geek.
I honestly don't know what he carried.
Okay, this one was. Saboteur wrote this one right as you took off the second time, and I wanted to read it, but I didn't want to interrupt you. Now, Saboteur has room to talk on this, so I'll let you discuss. Have you ever heard of a list of captured goods from Sand Creek? A lot of white men's goods.
Did find a lot of that stuff. Supposedly, they found a couple of white scalps in there as well. And that was kind of their justification for doing it. But if you look at history, if they hadn't have committed the atrocities of the mutilations, I don't think Sand Creek would have got the attention that it got. And most certainly, if they hadn't have paraded themselves through Denver wearing body parts on their coats and on their saddles, I don't think it would have got the bad press, if you will, that it got at the time. The people were appalled by what had happened. The government was appalled. But yeah, the fact that those people did what they did, that's really where the atrocity and why it got such a bad rap. But yeah, I'm not surprised because, like I said, John Smith was trading with them, and so they would have a lot of stuff. They were the Cheyennes were definitely not against having the white man's materials, if you will. But yeah, I looked at that list and it's been on such a long time. I can't remember what all was on it, to be 100% honest. But I do know they found quite a bit of stuff. And then the one thing I forgot to mention at the Battle of Julesburg is that there were a handful of men that get killed there at Julesburg that had been involved in the Sand Creek Massacre, and I forgot what unit they were tied to. But when the Indians killed them, they found 2 scalps that they were able to identify who the scalps belonged to by the decorations and such that were in the hair. And those soldiers suffered some extreme mutilation that they had not done to the other ones they killed there. And so that really truly was the first vengeance or justice, if you will, for the Sand Creek, because they got those soldiers that had already mustered out.
Yeah. Here's your question from Hardy, and you'll have to answer this because honestly, I have not read enough on either of those 2 guns to know.
Let's see, Hardy. You definitely, I've seen a lot more reference to carbines. Now at the Fetterman Massacre, they supposedly had rifles.
Mm-hmm.
And then at Fort Laramie, the 11th Ohio, I've seen the accounts where they said they had the carbines, but we've got a photograph of a soldier from the 11th that has a full-length rifle.
Mm-hmm.
So I really, to be honest with you, I think it was probably mixed. I don't think there was really standard. I think they probably just, whatever got shipped out, got issued out.
Well,
and so,
just have to bear in mind that overall, at least on the Spencer side, from 1860, basically late 1860, early 1861 to 1869, they, between Burnside Company and the Spencer Rifle Company, they made 200,000 of these.
Yeah.
And for a non-main military arm, that's a lot of firearms in the 19th century.
But you definitely see a lot more reference to carbine. So yeah, for the references, a lot of guys say, "Oh yeah, we was issued a carbine," but there's a couple pictures of the full length rifle. So like I said, I think it was probably mixed. I think some probably did have carbines, some probably did have rifles.
Mm-hmm. Now on the Sharps end, I would assume there would be more of the full length rifles, not because of the military full length rifles, but the full length sporting rifles for buffalo hunting and stuff like that.
You're right, yeah, for buffalo hunting. But the military, there was definitely a lot of Sharps carbines because the Cav and the Dragoons, in the 1850s had Sharps, and then during the Civil War, it was all cavalry at that point. They predominantly were issued Sharps through the war. And then towards the end of the war, that's when you start seeing units get issued the Spencer. And the 7th Cav at the Washita had Spencers. And the 7th Cav is going to have Spencers up until 1874 when they get replaced with trapdoors. Now, for the handgun, I've seen one reference, and it's been a long time ago, that said they had Remington. So I'm not 100% clear as to what it was, but I do believe they did have Remingtons at the Washita.
Mm-hmm. Now, I either read the other day, or was it you that told me that Fetterman's guys that had the Spencers had full-length rifles and not carbines?
Yes, they did.
Okay, so yeah. Okay, I thought I'd heard that. I think you told me that.
Yeah, we was doing some research on that, and they just mentioned Spencers when you read in the historical accounts, but after they did a little more research, they found out that they had the full-length rifles.
That'd be kind of hard to carry on. They weren't the infantry; that was the cavalry had the full-length rifles, right?
Yeah, and what was funny is that the Spencers had been issued to the musicians.
Yeah,
and so Carrington took it away from musicians and gave it to the
Saboteur said, "Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Saboteur said, wasn't one of the men at Beecher Island that snuck out a brother to the Stillwell from Tombstone?"
Oh boy, that one's more in depth than I've read into, so I don't know 100%, but I do know that Frank Stillwell had a brother in Tombstone that was killed by Wyatt Earp, I do believe, and Stillwell was going to kill Wyatt Earp for that, and it never come to fruition. But Stillwell's brother was in Tombstone, and I think. I don't have the book on me because I can look it up right quick, but I think, one of the ones was a Stillwell. Was it? Okay, I got the Frank Stillwell book. I'll be right back.
Okay, Hardy said, were trapdoor Springfield surplused out to the civilian market very much in the 1860s to 80s? Would a civilian have been able to get a hold of the current issue Marshall rifle? That is a very good question, Hardy, and I've been studying that myself here lately because I always hear about the buffalo hunters using the 66, 50, 70 trapdoors. And you always hear about Buffalo Bill Cody having Lucretia Borgia, his 1866 trapdoor. He got Lucretia Borgia before the guys he got his in July of 1867, like a few days before the guys that were going to be at the Hayfield and the wagon box fight got theirs, and he was not in the military at the time. He was a civilian scout, and I always wondered how in the world did he get that. Well, he was at Fort Larned. He did not have a firearm. Indian trouble all around. They sent him to Fort Dodge. He did not have a firearm. They said, here, take this. This is one of the first ones that got here. When you get to Fort Dodge, turn it in with this letter, get yourself a muzzle loader, come home. Well, when he got to Fort Dodge, he turned the letter in, and the rifle just kept going with him for the rest of his life, and he killed 2,000 to 3,000 buffalo for the railroad with that rifle and got the name Buffalo Bill. But other than that, there's not supposed to be any civilians buying from Springfield. As far as I can tell, Springfield didn't sell directly anything to civilians until the civilian marksmanship program got kicked off in 1916. And so what actually happened was when they got too many of the 66s on hand, the 50-70 trapdoors, they sold them to Remington, and Remington sold them to France. France had 27,000 of them for a few years, and then a very young Francis Bannerman bought them and brought them back and cut them down and put them on the civilian market in the 70s and 80s. And so you're going to see those come out onto the civilian market. About 27,000 of the 66s hit the civilian market in the mid-1870s. And then as they move into 1873 and they start to slowly fade out the 68 and 70 versions of that musket, which were in 50 caliber, they're going to sell those to other people, and they will eventually wind up in the hands of Sears and Roebuck, Bannerman's, some places like that, but they will never sell them directly to civilians until at least 1916. As far as the 73s go, those don't, a lot of people don't, those don't come out until almost 1900. I mean, they don't surplus those things at all, as far as I can tell. Now, maybe tomorrow I'll read something that's different, but from what I can tell right now, they hang on to those things until, of course, 1893. They're still making them until 1893. And then they hang on to them as they're transitioning to the Krag, and then they use them in the Spanish-American War. And even as late as World War I, they're still in inventory and being used by Home Guard so that all your 03s and your Krags and your 1917s can go to the front. So you really don't see them even start to surplus those until at least 1916, maybe later. So, yeah, to run into a 73 in civilian hands would, I think, be rare, at least in the 1870s and 80s. I know it would be rare. So I hope that answers your question.
All right. So I got my Stillwells confused. So, yes, Comanche Jack Stillwell, 19-year-old, was at Beecher Island, and it was his brother Frank Stillwell down in Tombstone. And Comanche Jack Stillwell will be one of the scouts at Washita. Let me double check. I'm pretty sure he was at the Washita. I know he worked with Custer. Yeah, he was. He was part of that Washita campaign.
Never met a gun I didn't like, Sin. He said, check out the Doris the Walrus video on Sand Creek. Had some interesting views. I really do like Doris the Walrus. His one on the 64 minutes. Was it the 64 Minnesota raid? Or was that 62?
62.
Well, whatever year that was, the Minnesota raid. He does a very good job of telling both sides from what I can tell. I don't know how historically accurate everything is. I'm not a historian, but I do know that I love to just sit and listen to his stories. Here you go. Martin Kavanaugh said, hey, Duke, how come the Europeans started taking scalps too? We did it first.
Yeah, Dakota. So there is a whole thing of, did the Europeans introduce scalping to the natives, or did the natives already do that and the Europeans extrapolated on it? And, I've read a couple of articles, and they found early evidence from, native skulls, basically, that prove that scalping was done prior to European colonization.
It's a natural thing. The Scottish did it.
Yeah. And what it comes down to is that, one of the ways back in the old days was to prove that you killed an enemy was to take the head in. And, if you kill a lot of enemies, that requires quite a bit of capacity to pack that many items with you. And so it's a lot easier just to take the scalp if you got 10 or 15 of them. And so, and early colonization period, like during the French, the 7 year war, the French and Indian War. That's what I'm looking for. That stuff, they did say, bring in the scalps to prove you killed the enemy and that such, but it had been going on for a long time. And if you look at some of the Plains Indians stuff, the way they did their hair, some tribes had 3 braids. You had the 2 big ones on the side, then you had a little one in the middle that made a perfect little round thing, and that was basically the scalp lock that they would take. You grab that. So that was the proof of, killed an enemy. But and it depends on what tribe you're looking at too. Some took the whole scalp, some just take a chunk of the scalp. When the whites would scalp Indians in the later 1800s to prove or to collect on a bounty and such, a lot of those guys would just cut little chunks out and turn one Indian into 7 so they could get a bigger bounty. But the whole scalping thing, it had been around. It's been around for a long time. As Garrett said, the Scottish were doing it. It's not anything that's really unique to any one particular group. But it's been, I've read accounts that the one Indian group that really didn't take scalps for trophies was the Apaches. There's not.
They had other means.
Yeah. And there were those that, survived scalping. There's this one guy that you see his picture every once in a while pop up where he had a very large chunk of his taken and survived it. The thing that's going to get you that would kill you is, the blood loss for one, especially if you've got other wounds, and then also infection, because that is a large wound that you really can't sew up, especially if somebody rides off with a piece that goes in there.
Yeah. Hardy said, thanks for the answer, Garrett. So for living history purposes, keep trapdoors pre-873. Like I said, that's not my final answer. That's what I know. I was just talking to Duke. I only have 4 books right now, and I've got more books coming. So that may change, but for right now, what I know is, they're not going to release those 73s at any point until at least the late 1890s, probably more like 1916 from what I can tell. Maybe some before that, but I'm not sure.
There is a picture of some buffalo hunters from the 1880s, and both of those men have full-length trapdoor rifles, but I do believe they are the
50-70s.
The 50-70 calibers.
Yeah, and that's what I was just saying. That's what I told him before. Sometime between 1872 and 1874, at some point, Bannerman gets a hold of those and starts bringing them back. And of course, they surplus the 50-70s when the 73s come out. But I have to do more research. But as far as I can tell, yeah, it's not really a 19th century thing. Soylent Green said, Garrett, I remember last chat you asked when 50-70s were surplus. I looked in my book from Frank Mayer, the Buffalo Runner, and he mentioned between 70 and 74. But now that's what I was saying. As far as I know, that was when Bannerman brought him back from France.
And I got to run and use the facilities right quick. I'll be right back.
Okay, I'll keep going. Joshua Harris said, a friend of my dad was in the Army Air Corps in World War II in the Aleutian Islands. He brought back a cut down 1873 trapdoor they used for bear. He brought it back home with him. Oh, yeah, those things lasted a long time. And the sad thing is they're not nearly as bad a rifle as a lot of people would make them out to be. You know, for a full-scale military at the time, for one thing, they were cheap to make because they already had the machinery to make all the stocks and the side plates, even when they did start making them new and everything, and the hammers. And other than that, it was actually a really good move for the United States military, I think, to keep them. Duke would argue probably that the Remington's rolling block's a little better, but I still think that the trapdoor was cheaper to produce.
Well, the thing about the trapdoor is that you already got a bunch of parts and stuff, and the thing about the rolling block, and I think that was probably one of the things, and this is speculation on my part, but I think one of the things that probably turned the Army away from it is the fact that it has to go to full cock in order to manipulate the action, whereas the trapdoor does not.
And all the ones I've held don't eject; they just extract. So
maybe
there's one that does. I don't know.
And the Sharps didn't win it because firing a Sharps from the prone position is not the easiest task. Same thing with manipulating the lever on the Spencer, not as easy in the prone position.
Yeah, Brass, some would have walked away from military inventory here and there. Yeah, I bet they did. I don't think it would have been on a very large scale, though. Well, it would be awesome to own a period rifle like the Sharps. I've never seen an Italian rifle. Oh, they make them.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Duke had one not too long ago.
Yeah, and I traded it for Henry. But I've been looking at one, and it's out of my price range right now. But there's one that's online that's Taylor's. It's one of the conversions from the cap lock to it's a 50-70 reproduction conversion. And if depending on how good the holster business does in the next 2 months and how good my pocketbook is looking in the next 2 months, I may try to swing that one because that's one I'd love to have as a carbine in 50-70.
There's a McNelly in 45-70.
The McNelly was 50-70 originally. It's a conversion, 63 conversion. And that's what this Taylor one is. But Cimarron has the rights to the McNelly name.
Yeah. Great description, Duke, of the guy living after being scalped, LOL, Gina Woods.
Yeah, and it did happen. And I seen somebody on their comment said scalping is actually moving all the skin from the head. It was dependent.
It depends on where you're at. Some people just the very center.
Yeah, just the top, just the back. Like I said, that little piece they called the scalp lock. Some took the whole thing. But if you look at native scalps, and I've seen a couple pictures of some that are still in museum collections. They're about that big around. And there's, I think it's the, Garrett's going to shoot me for referencing this, but there's an R.L. Wilson book that goes over weapons in the West, and it's not specific to Colts or anything. It's just a generalized, and I reference it more for the pictures, but I think it's that one. There's a picture in there of a blonde scalp, and it's just that big around. It's not very big at all. And it's stretched in a hoop, too, so it was probably even a little smaller than that when it started out.
Roger Ranger started scalping in the French and Indian War. Yeah, I've actually read that. I got his diary back there. Hi, guys. I just inherited an 1885 Winchester Lowall and 32 rimfire. Ammo is almost available. Can it be converted to the 32 Smith & Wesson Long? I got some experience in this era. area. Because
Midway USA had a video where they did convert one of those.
Yeah. But if you don't want to, it takes a long time to get them ordered. But if you want to keep it all original, order you some 22 blank 32 rimfire.
Yeah.
And you can order the bullet mold and everything and the loading stuff for it if you want, or you can just use 325, the same round ball basically you use in the 49 pocket model, and shove it in the end. Since it's a single shot, I wouldn't worry about it because you can always put that 22 blank that loads for the rimfire up in the right position.
And if you can get that block out, take a look in it, because some of those were made to do either or.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, there were some. You have to go in and you have to take the hammer out, if I remember right, and you have to move the firing pin. But it does have the ability to fire either one.
Yeah. Brass, Joshua Harris said, Pedersoli makes a great Sharks replica. Isn't that what you had?
Yeah, I had a Pedersoli, and I liked it. It was, out of the box, it was very accurate. I shot a 1-inch group at 100 yards, and I never adjusted the sights, and it was dead on. I shot some black powder in that, and that black powder got caked in that barrel, and I scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed, and it got to where it would shoot an 1.5-inch group at 100 yards. But, yeah, I hated trading that one off because that was my college graduation present to myself. But the opportunity, the offer that I got on the trade was too good to pass up.
Yeah.
And it was becoming a safe queen.
Brass 762 says, I've heard some crazy stories of the Navajo looting Fort Wingate after World War II when it became a place to stockpile weapons. That's interesting. Hardy said, that reminds me of something from the Coen Brothers' True Grit. Were dead bodies really worth money in trade?
If they had a wanted poster on them.
It depends on where you're at.
That's kind of a Hollywood thing.
Well, it depends, because like in London in the 1870s, 60s, there was an epidemic of grave robbers and body snatchers there. Right. Because they would sell them to the local doctors, school, physics school, whatever you want to call it. And I don't know how convenient that would be in the West, but even in America, like I believe Townsend's have episodes on body snatchers. That it depends. You've got to be in a civilized area where they're doing research, because they need those cadavers for research. And there was a huge thing in London, and I can't remember the names, but two brothers in the 1850s were doing it, and they got so good at it that they were having to put watchers over all the graveyards. I believe it was in London, and so they couldn't get into the graveyard, so they started just going out and killing people on the street to take them in, and they both got hung. But that was a huge, it was a huge scandal for the what do you want to call it? The physicians' schools at the time, because they were obviously buying these bodies even when they were coming in a little too fresh.
But I've never seen any reference to that out here in the West at all.
Yeah, I don't know why you would. Joshua Sarah Harris said teeth were in high demand, but I really just don't know why you would when there's no facility to study the cadaver that you would, Now, maybe you would rob the cadaver from the grave for its jewelry or clothing, but that's the only other thing I can think of, really. So, are you still got more to talk about? I forgot where we left off.
Well, we kind of covered the Washita there, so that's what we was planning on getting there. I wished I'd read up more. I could have got more in depth on the Washita, but
we've ran 60 all night. We're doing good.
Yeah. So if you're interested, you find Custer's book, My Life on the Plains. One of my favorite quotes in that book, and I haven't read it all the way through because the way Custer writes, it's just kind of he's very flamboyant. Good descriptions, but he's a little flamboyant. He gives a pretty good description of the interior of a Cheyenne teepee at the Washita. He talks about he walks into one kind of as things are going on, and talks about how things are laid out, and they're buffalo robes all around, and little storage boxes and items hung in the teepee and such. And you think, living in a teepee, those folks wouldn't have a lot of items, but we have a lady that comes up there to Fort Laramie that she brings and sets up a teepee and fully stocks the inside of it. And when they have a lot of stuff on the inside of that, it's like you got enough room to walk, sleep, cook your breakfast, and that's about it. Mm-hmm. There's a little trail around the center where the fire pit would be.
All that stuff's insulation. So, going on here, Sedalia Gun Shop had an online presence, and they have a selection of these period rifles.
I've been inside that gun shop a lot of years ago, and that is a wonderful little store.
Yeah. We'd be making holsters to fit Ruger Wranglers. I think we discussed this before.
Yeah. You guys still got them little Rough Rider 22s?
Yeah, because the Rough Rider is literally the same size frame as the 49 pocket model with a 7.5-inch barrel. Literally, you can put the trigger guard off of a 49 pocket model onto the bottom of the Rough Rider. Can't do it the other way around because it's all one piece on the Rough Rider. But yeah,
I might have you guys see if one of those will fit in one of the Cheyennes and see how loose they are. But I do have access to a Heritage, and if they're about the same size, I could easily make a holster for one of them.
Yeah. Chief Dan, George, and Little Big Man. Wonderful scene with the scalps.
That is a good scene.
So I think that's through with the comment section.
Yeah.
We've been going exactly 2 hours.
So, what do we want to talk about on the next one, Garrett?
Whatever is your show, man. The next one will be all on your channel.
I didn't get everything read up on this one. It's like, I don't know if I'll have time because I'm going to be starting real earnest in the leatherwork and stuff here again on Monday. I've been kind of piddling around here lately with some other leather stuff, some fancier stuff. I was hoping to get a little bit bigger bang for my buck, if you will, out of it. But I got a bunch of deer hides I'm working tomorrow. So tomorrow I get the joy of stinking for like an outhouse for the whole day. But come Monday, I'm going to start up on holsters again. So if you've got an order with me currently, anybody viewers out there, if you currently have an order, I'm going to be starting tomorrow. I don't know if I got enough leather to fill all my orders because I've got quite a few of them. I know the 11 Bang Bang, they've got 5. I'm going to see if I can fit in. If not, I can do that on the next one. But I think I've got all in all like 20 some odd holsters, maybe even 30 that I've got to get done for folks. And I still got some sitting over at the house I need to get together and get stitched together. I've got a couple that are sitting there that people are waiting on, but yeah, going to get started here pretty soon. So if you want something, let me know. Because once I get back up to Wyoming sometime in April, I don't know what I'm going to be able to do for holsters. So
Guns and Waters, then. Hey, Guns and Water might be able to answer that question even better than I could. He's right here. If you're listening, Guns and Water, we're talking about trying to figure out the exact time, the first time the 73 4570 trapdoors were actually surplused out to anybody, not even just civilians, but out to markets, because we know that it's between 1872 and 74 for the 66s. And as the 73s come on, the 68s and 70s get surplus. But I'm not real sure. I haven't seen a lot of references to when the 73 gets surplus. So if you're out there and you know that, I'd like to hear about it. We got a few more comments here, but maybe we should give like 3 things that you think you know enough about to talk about here, and you have the books on, and let the chat decide.
Oh boy. Well, we could continue on this series because I've got a couple books on the Buffalo War, so the 1874 war. So that'll be continuing on right after the Washita, going into that with Adobe Walls. And Red River War and that stuff. I've got a couple of Mountain Man books. I got a lot of my Texas history books. We could get into Texas history, but
what do you think? What do you think about doing an in-depth dive on the Patterson or the Walker, or just one of them?
We could jump into that as well. But yeah, there's a couple options there. But yeah, I know on the Buffalo War, I've got 2 books, and I could easily get those read before the thing. But well, actually,
If that's what you want to do, that's what we'll do.
Or we could just start talking about the buffalo hunting. That might not be a bad idea. Is just focus on the decimation of the buffalo.
Yeah. Yeah, Guns and Water, that's kind of, I haven't seen anything, at least of them surplus in the 4570s, at least until the late 1890s and maybe early 1900s. But if I do, guys, I'll make a video on my channel if I do find it and let you know. But I don't think it happened until almost the turn of the century for the 4570 guns anyway.
And you know what? I've never seen a civilian with a 4570 in the pictures, and they can kind of stand out a little different than the other ones.
Mm-hmm. The locks, they look completely different as far as, well, first of all, they're blued, and the other ones are bright. The locks stand out on the older ones, and barrel bands are slightly different. You know, ramrods are different. You can tell just by looking. The overall length, you know. So somebody wants, Chris Klein wants to talk about Tom Tobin.
Hell, I could get that book read, but that one is a dry read.
Only certain parts of it are exciting, huh?
Oh man, I mean, it's good information. It's a very scholarly book. Man, I started reading that one. I was like, oh boy, this one's dry. But yeah, I could talk about that, and we could get into the Espinosas. And I've got one book on them that's a really good source. But Tom Tobin was a rough character.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you definitely did not want to get crosswise of him. But yeah, we can do that. We can talk about, I don't think I've got the book Uncle Dick Wooten here. Yeah, I do have the book Uncle Dick Wooten. We could get into him. Anyway, yeah, we can run this for another 4 or 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then see what y'all vote in on there.
Yeah, so you're talking right now, like Texas Rangers, basically, Uncle Dick Wooten, and what was the third one you said?
Tom Tobin.
Tom Tobin. Okay, so let's talk about Texas history, Uncle Dick Wooten or Tom Tobin. What do you guys want to hear?
Or the Buffalo. Because that's one I could easily do for about 3 hours.
Soylent, yeah, I actually, come to think of it, I have seen some surplus 4570s in 1902. And I have that book over there. And I know that ad is from 1902, but that's like the first ad I've seen with it. And like I said, I know Springfield doesn't sell them directly to civilians until 1916 through the civilian marksmanship program.
That was funny up there at Fort Laramie. One of the guys that works up there, he was cleaning out one of the storage rooms that hadn't been cleaned out in years. And they bring over a bunch of breech blocks for 73 trapdoors. And they put them on my desk, and I'm like, what the heck are these? And they're like, oh, they found these over there, and we don't know what they're to. I'm sitting there looking, and I'm like, well, there's 7 of them. They're all 73 trapdoors. They're just the breech block. They've had the firing pins and everything else taken out of them. And it's just these blocks. And the firing pin channels are wore out on them.
Yeah, so they got the doors on them. They got or is it, it's just the block, not the receiver, is what you're saying?
Yeah, it's just the block. Just the block.
Okay.
And I'm sitting there like, what in the heck? Where did these come from? And got to looking around. Well, back before the Park Service made it to where you couldn't shoot originals, they were shooting the original 4570s that they had in the collection for demonstration. And I got to looking on there, and it's like, there's 773 trapdoor blocks. There's 7 trapdoors with 84 stamped blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Got to looking, and it's like the 84 blocks do not match in the patina at all. They're like bright blued.
Mm-hmm.
And these rifles don't have a lot of bluing left. Oh, the firing pin channels were wore out. They figured they were unsafe. So they swapped them out, and so there's 73 trapdoors with 84 breech blocks on them.
The only difference between those two rifles, well, there's a couple. The 84's got a faster twist rate. It's designed for a 500 grain bullet instead of the 402 or whatever it was.
405,
that the original one had 405, yeah. And so obviously, since they got a different twist rate and a heavier bullet, they have the new Buffington style sights on the 84s. And other than that, I think they're the same outside of maybe the ramrod. I have to look at it.
Right. But yeah, it's funny. So yeah, I wound up giving those blocks back to the museum there, museum portion of the fort. But yeah, it's like good luck trying to figure out what gun goes to what block and getting the block back in a working condition. It's just like I think you just kind of put them in here and say these 7 rifles go with these 7 blocks
because they're not serialized on the block.
No. The only way you could do it is try to match up the patina, and the patina they're all distinct in how they've worn over the years. But there was
so you think they did this in the 19th century, or somebody did it in the?
They did it at Fort Laramie. They did that so that they could use them for firing demonstrations.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Pretty much come to the conclusion because, like I said, the firing pin channels on the 73s were wore out.
That's what I was about to ask. See, I had in my mind you were talking about they did this in the 19th century, and I was like, good grief. What kind of war did they go through that they wore the firing pin channels out?
No, it just, these, I think they just did it so that they'd be a little bit safer.
Yep.
But, yeah, because we were sitting there like, why are we got this? Like, they were firing the originals before they changed the rules because the Gatling gun, they fired the Gatling gun out there at Fort Laramie before they changed the rules on that. And at that time, they was firing live ammo. There was one hill that they would fire in for a demonstration. And I think the Mountain Hotchkiss they fired once or twice before they changed the rule. But, yeah, that was real interesting to watch that or to find that out. It's like, okay, well, know where these go. Good luck finding what gun they belong to. But yeah, they were early 73s too because they had the crossed arrow on them.
Yeah.
That's very early production of the 73s.
Well, and did they have did the guns themselves have 73 on the lock plate? Do you remember?
Yeah, they had 18.
So those were.
Excuse me. They did not. They just had the arrows on them.
Okay, because those are guns that were turned in 1884 and refurbished. Okay, so
yeah, but
they took the 73 off the lock plate in 1884.
They had the crossed arrows, and everything I found says that those were produced before they stamped them with 1873.
Mm-hmm.
So this was in like the first few thousand. How they managed to find 7 of them, I don't know. But whoever was there and was in charge of the firearms portion at Fort Laramie for the demonstrations, they swapped them with 84s, and it comes down so they can do it safely.
I imagine that if they were originally from Fort Laramie, I'm sure they got sent in sequential serial numbers.
No, actually, I don't think they have anything that is original to the fort that I know of. Because back in the 70s and I think it was even in the 50s, they just started buying guns to use for display purposes. And then eventually, they bought a bunch of, if you go up in the Cav squad, all the trapdoors up there are actually Harrington and Richardson, which are just as good as the originals.
Oh, yeah. Especially, that was one other thing I was going to bring up, the officer's model. I don't know if they sold the officer's model to civilians or not, but if you were a civilian, that would be a very expensive rifle.
Yeah.
But the officer's model, just thinking of that because you said H&R, and that's literally the only copy of the officer's model I can find for sale anywhere because they're so rare.
Pedersoli makes them in limited quantities.
Yeah, Goss Loco said there are several ramrods for the late 73s, late production service rifle, ramrods, bayonets, cadet rifles, never got ramrod bayonets. Yeah, the ramrod bayonets, I believe, actually considered the model 1892, even though it doesn't change the 1884 name on it. I actually have one. And I think there's 2 of the actual 1873 pre-1884 ramrod types. One with a single swell and one... No, I think there's only one with the double swell. But anyway, I got to do more research on it. But yeah, let's see. There's a couple votes here. Gosloka voted for Buffalo. Saboteur voted for Buffalo. Were we talking about doing a Buffalo episode?
Yeah. I said something about we could do one on the Buffalo because that one I could do easily.
The Buffalo Wars?
No, just
Buffalo
in general.
Okay, yeah, that's good with me. If that's
what we start talking about the fur trade era and then go all the way up until the decimation.
I got some interest in the Buffalo era myself, so in Buffalo hunting.
And we can get into the Buffalo War because
that's part of
the decimation of the buffalo leads to the Buffalo War.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you think? You want to keep going? You about ready to shut this down?
We can shut her down if we want to run for another 4 or 5 minutes, and if anybody's got any more questions, and if we don't get any questions in that time period, we'll shut her down. Yeah,
we'll go for till 2:20. You got any questions? Shout them out.
So what's the 11 Bang Bang got coming out tomorrow?
Caleb is going on an alligator hunt.
Seriously?
For a paper alligator.
Oh.
This is people were kept requesting to see more of Caleb, so he went out with Noah, filmed his whole video all himself, did everything himself, and made the whole thing all himself. So it's probably our first 100% Caleb video that's ever been turned out.
Nice.
Yeah, that's about how it looks, Soylent. Oh.
But yeah, on my end, I've got a bunch of shorts coming out over the next week. It's just book reviews. Which I noticed those aren't doing real well. They get a couple hundred views and that's it. The one on the book of the interview with J. Wright Moore, that one is only got like 50 some views. I figured that one would jump up there, but it didn't. But yeah, that's kind of what I got going out there. Long content stuff, I don't know when I'm going to be able to start doing that again. I need to jump on here and do some editing, but it's like the leather business and trying to tan deer hides and stuff. It's just like I don't have time.
I have a long content video edited and ready to put up, but for some reason my computer won't let me do it.
Uh-oh.
On your side.
Oh, okay. Which one is that for?
I just did a range day video.
Oh, okay.
I was ready to put it up on your channel, and for some reason, it won't let me. So I guess I'll figure that out tomorrow.
Right.
It's already edited and sitting here.
Well, I set it up on YouTube to where you could do it, manage it to 11 Bang Bang Direct.
Yeah. And I gotta go fill out all the paperwork to do that. Right. That's all. I just need to do it. Saboteur said you should do a short on what you talked about in December, where a bow and arrow beats a 6-shooter.
Yeah, we could do that.
He said a short.
Yeah. So I'm thinking it's like my uncle's got a couple long bows. I could just stand out in the yard and fire off a few hours fast. Like, of course, I don't know how good that'd be, but
yeah.
Yeah, Soylent.
Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong one there.
I have a feeling that these deer hides, they've been sitting for 2 weeks in water. I'm probably going to upchuck my breakfast a couple times while working on these things. I already know it. When something stinks so bad that it makes your throat burn, my grandmother told me I needed to wear a mask, and I told her that would just hold in the projectiles that's going to be coming out.
Chris Klein had a question. He actually commented this earlier. I saw it and forgot to read it. I'm sorry, Chris.
Oh, yeah. So the Cav carried on the carbine almost all, I think all military carbines that were carried on horseback have a ring on them that would attach to a sling. And so
except this one.
That one's missing its ring. But that be clipped in. It'd have a swivel on it. And so when you're riding, basically that's so that gun always stays with you.
Now, is that on a body harness or on a harness to the saddle?
No, it's on a body harness.
Yeah, okay.
So when you go to mount the horse, you take and you throw that up over your shoulder, and you got to do it right, because if you don't do it right, you're going to have a wreck. you'll wind up with a gun between you and the horse. That's not good. And the 11th Ohio Volunteer Cav, the 11th OVC on here has a great video on that as well. But you throw it up over your shoulder, you throw your leg over your horse, and then you don't ever try to reach up and pull the carbine down because you're going to cover the guy standing behind you in the line. So you just kind of drop your shoulder down, it falls off, and then you grab it. And on the rigging, so on your cinch strap, the rigging for that, on the 59 McClellan, they've got a socket. And you stick the muzzle down through that socket. And that's what keeps it from bouncing around as you're riding around on the prairie. Later on, they actually go to kind of a small scabbard that's about this long. It's really a boot. Actually, if you go back and watch the movie El Dorado, that's what they use for Mississippi's shotgun scabbard. An old trapdoor boot, and that was a later one that had the brass throat on it to keep the throat open. So that was attached on the side of the saddle. And so when you was riding on the horse, you'd have it tucked in there, still attached to the sling, of course. But yeah, it was kind of a combination. And then, when you went to draw it, you draw it out, of course, and it would be, and then if for whatever reason you drop it, it's still attached to you. Or if you have to drop it to go to the pistol, it's still attached.
Yeah. I never thought about that, but you're right. That is because I got one up there. I guess I won't get it down right now.
And I have found a lot of those that have been modified into modern holsters. I just found a picture of one for a Colt Signal Action Army last night that have been modified from a trapdoor boot.
Yep. Okay, we got another one. I got the 1884 trapdoor cadet rifle with the Buffington sight. How in the blue blazes do you use the long range settings on that thing? I don't see how you would hold it to use the top notch. Yeah.
At that point, it's artillery.
That is a volley fire notch when you get up that high. You're not actually aiming. You're laying down crossfire. You're laying down fire on a distant group of people. I mean, I suppose you could, but also it's a cadet rifle, so the rifle itself is shorter, so your sight radius is a little shorter. So the Buffington sight is not technically set up for the barrel length of the cadet rifle. So you might be able to do a little better with a longer barrel using that sight. But yeah, I like the Buffington sight just because not only is it adjustable, it actually has notches and a visible, you see every little notch you adjust it to. And so that's kind of cool in my opinion. It's not hard to understand, or you're not just Kentucky windage it. Louisiana Gray said that's an interesting note.
Yep.
Mississippi's holster.
But yeah, Steve, it wasn't on the stirrup strap. It was on that ring where the cinch strap would attach. And so
the D ring?
Well, there was a full ring on there, but on the military saddle you had the cinch, and then you put a surcingle around the whole thing too to help keep it down. So it was double cinched.
Yeah. Yeah, for loading for the original trapdoor. I've seen that. Actually, I have the it's not over here, but I actually have the 1884 manual of arms for that gun, and they actually give a real simple description of that in there too. I'm looking into quite a few of these books. I've only got, like I said, 5 at the moment. So there's one by Al Fresca, I believe is his name, that I'm looking, book number 2 that everybody tells me I need to get. That's the next one on my list. So Eric M509 said channel strikes 14 days restriction, live stream showing a gun. Well, that's why we don't show guns. We show airsofts.
Yep.
And AR American says gotta go, and I believe we do too.
Yeah, getting there toward the end of it. So.
Yep. Got any final thoughts?
That's all I got. So I guess 2 weeks from tonight, we'll have the next installment of Tales of Trails, and that'll probably be the last one for a little while because once I get back up to Wyoming, I don't know what the schedule is going to look like. But by popular demand, we're going to talk about the decimation of the buffalo, get into a little bit of the Buffalo War, I guess, on that. Probably get into a little bit of Adobe Walls. Yeah. Talk a little bit about the northern hunts and such.
We get to talk about 4570s and 50 government center fires, and 50 rim fires, and
that one might turn into a 3 or 4 hour chat, depending on, because that's one thing I could really get into a lot in depth.
I'm excited for that one.
Yeah. So on that next one, Garrett, are we gonna do it
just
on
your
both
channel
channels or just my channel?
However you want to do it, but I think we can pull all these people over to just your channel.
Okay.
So everybody, next time, everybody who watches on our channel, I will encourage them to go over there and watch on your channel.
Okay, yeah. So we'll see how that works. If we don't get the viewership that we're getting on the duel, we might go back to the duel, but we'll definitely do it over here on this one next time. So keep an eye out for that. And then Garrett, next week you guys have
Dustin and you, if you're coming on, and Snapper.
Oh, okay, yeah, I can come on if you want.
It's always open for you.
Yeah, so we'll look into that next week then and see what's going on. I might take a break and work on leather. Of course, I could work on leather while I'm doing the chat too, I guess. So, All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming on here tonight. Thanks for making another successful chat. We'll see y'all here in a couple of weeks and probably over on 11 Bang Bang next week. So, y'all stay safe, keep your powder dry. Take her easy.
Bye.